What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to another Black Ops 7 gun guide. In today's episode, we're going to be diving deep into the brand new assault rifle that was added with Season 2. This is the EGRT-17. And the unique thing about this gun is it has Ricochet ammo. We're going to be talking about those details in a little bit, but let's first start off with the basics here. And when it comes to our rate of fire, this is 811 rounds per minute, which is quite a fast rate of fire for an assault rifle in this game. And this gun is going to be a 5 to 7 shot kill, and this means with a 5-shot kill, we're killing in 296 milliseconds. Now this time to kill is worse than average for an assault rifle up close, but it's not terrible by any means. Just for reference, the M15, which is considered to be quite a solid gun in this game, it kills in 312 milliseconds. It's also a 5-shot kill up close. And I just wanted to point that out so you don't immediately write this off just because it has a worse than average time to kill for an AR. As for headshots, at least in the maximum damage range, it's generally not going to be great for you. You have to hit 3 out of your 4 shots to the head to get a 4-shot kill for a 222 millisecond time to kill, or with the headshot barrel, that'll cut it down to 2 headshots required. So at least up close, generally speaking, headshots aren't really worth going for, unless you're grinding camos, of course. In either case, let's move on to our damage ranges. This is an area where this gun really excels. It has by far the best range profile in the assault rifle category. Its 5-shot kill range is 44 meters. And like I said, this kills faster than the M15, which is also a 5-shot kill, and yet it has a very noticeably better 5-shot kill range. So that definitely goes to show that this gun has a lot of potential, especially in those mid-ranges, after many of the other assault rifles have dropped off to their 2nd or 3rd damage range. However, one downside here is we do have quite a slow bullet velocity for an assault rifle at 650 meters per second. This is below average, and that's more likely to be the limiting factor for you if you're stretching your range out a bunch. Now, of course, we have our barrel attachments that can increase our range and or velocity values. And you can see with the long barrel, we get a ridiculous boost to our damage range at 45%. And this will increase our maximum damage range up to 64 meters, which is just insane with this gun. However, like I said, bullet velocity tends to be more of a limiting factor for you if you're really stretching your range out. And therefore, I actually quite like the hybrid barrel on this. So you get a bit of a boost to your velocity and your range values. As for rapid fire, this will boost our rate of fire up to 923 rounds per minute for a 260 millisecond time to kill in that 5-shot kill range, so far more competitive there. And we only see a 5% loss to our damage range and a 12% loss to our bullet velocity value. So rapid fire, definitely not a bad option on this gun by any means. And now let's have a look at hardcore game modes, and at a glance, this looks like it would be really good in hardcore, because it's a 1-shot kill to the body in its maximum damage range, which, as we saw, is the best in the assault rifle category by far. It's 44 meters. That's excellent. However, we need to consider the fact that bullets will ricochet with this, and that means you will likely unintentionally be killing your teammates and even possibly yourself while playing the game in hardcore. And therefore, I would recommend staying away from this gun unless you really like rolling the dice every time you pull the trigger. Now, after that, let's have a look at our hipfire stats. And we are a little bit worse than average for an assault rifle here, so this gun doesn't tend to excel with hipfire unless you're relying on those bank shots. In that case, sometimes you just want to hipfire randomly into a room and hope that you get a bunch of random lucky hits out of that. Next, let's take a look at our recoil, and this gun is fairly accurate. It starts off kicking upward with a slight lean to the left, and then it cuts to the right after that. And you can see there's not much of a gap between the shots fired. It's a fairly manageable and controllable recoil pattern. One key thing to point out is your initial several shots fired, those are going to have a bit more recoil than the rest of the shots fired, so it has a bit of initial climb to it. But overall, it's a fairly accurate gun, not the most accurate assault rifle, but more than accurate enough to handle. And I would consider this to be a general strength with this gun. Then getting into our handling stats, for our aim down sight and sprint out times, they're pretty close to average for an assault rifle, so really not bad there. However, our slide to fire and dive to fire times are noticeably worse than average for assault rifles. So I wouldn't recommend implementing too many slides or dives with this gun, at least into fights. And now let's have a look at our reload add time, which unfortunately is very slow. While we do get a solid default capacity at 34 rounds, our reload time is 2.32 seconds, which is quite slow for an assault rifle at least. So we could use the flip mag, which maintains the same capacity, but gives us faster reload times for both reloads. Or I actually really like the fast mag attachment here. It does reduce our capacity down to 30 rounds, which is now just a standard capacity for an assault rifle, but it gives us an insanely fast reload time at just 0.98 seconds, and it also improves handling stats, so lots of benefits there to using that. And having that smaller magazine isn't that bad when you can reload it so quickly. Or alternatively, you do have 2 extended mag options there to choose from. And then finally, for our standard basic stats, we've got our mobility stats here. And across the board, we're just right around average for an assault rifle. Nothing out of the ordinary here. So now let's talk about bank shots. With this gun, when you shoot a surface, that shot will bounce off the surface, and by default, you get 1 bounce off of that surface. And interestingly, it will bounce regardless of the angle. You don't have to be at like an extreme angle to ricochet it. It will literally bounce straight back at you. If you shoot directly at a wall at like a perpendicular angle, it will still bounce straight backwards. And surprisingly, that shot will maintain full damage after the ricochet based on all of my testing. So that means you can try banking shots around a corner or off the floor, for instance, in front of a target, and you won't be losing damage after that. But keep in mind, if it hits a second surface, then it doesn't bounce again, at least by default. Now, it is also worth noting when it comes to this bounce, the range value is calculated by the distance the round travels, not the range between you and your target. So even if you're not that far from your target, if the bullet has to take a weird path to get there, you may be dropping off to the second or third damage range. And this might sound like a lot of upsides, but the key downside to this is this means there is 0 penetration even through really thin surfaces with this gun. The one exception is glass. It will break through glass that can be broken on the map. So like windows, for instance, you can still shoot through those, but outside of that, anything you hit, you're just gonna bounce off. That means if somebody's using very light cover that you could normally just punch through no problem and deal damage, you can't with this gun. It'll just bounce off. And so I often find that this is more of a downside in my experience because it's more common that there will be a situation where I want to punch through a light surface to deal damage to a target than I would ever want to try banking a shot and getting that perfect angle and just hoping for the best and hoping I'll hit the target. So definitely a bit of a gimmick on this gun, but we can take that gimmick a little bit further and make it more powerful with its unique prestige attachment. This is the MFS Heated Echo rounds, and the key with this is it now gives you 3 bounces off surfaces rather than just 1. It also improves our damage range and bullet velocity, and this comes at the cost of recoil. So let's have a look at this. First off, looking at our damage range. As you can see here, the damage range improvement isn't massive by any means. It takes our maximum damage range from 44 meters up to 49 meters, whereas our velocity is improved nicely up to 790 meters per second. Then taking a look at that recoil reduction, as we can see here when looking at it side by side, it's really not that much worse. Sure, there's slightly more recoil with the heated rounds, but it's still very manageable. This is not a major increase to recoil. And now let's look at these multiple bounce situations. As you can see here, unsurprisingly, after a single bounce, we don't lose any damage. The gun is still dealing 22 damage here. After 2 bounces, we're once again still dealing 22 damage. So once again, no loss to our damage value after 2 bounces. But what about 3 bounces? Well, there you go. Once again, no reduction to our damage. I do want to point out, in the firing range when I was trying to do this testing, I was running into situations where it appeared I was dealing like half the amount of damage. So perhaps there is some situation where you can be dealing less damage after a ricochet, but I was unable to replicate that in private matches against actual character models, and I tend to trust my testing against actual character models rather than testing against those firing range dummies, since they don't always behave as expected, and they don't always match up with what happens in real games. So when it comes to this prestige ammo, it takes what is normally a kind of useless gimmick into something that can be very useful. If you have this on and you just spray a bunch of rounds, especially into a small room, it's very likely you're going to get some hits, and those hits are actually going to be dealing a decent amount of damage. Now, I wouldn't necessarily count on that and use that as a meta playstyle, but it can be fun and interesting to get those bounce shot hits. And now that we have that covered, let's get into a few excellent attachment combinations I've got for you guys with the EGRT. And the first one I wanted to share is just my balanced stealth build. With this one, we're using the Redwell suppressor, so I can get a little more recoil control out of that. We can definitely afford to lose a bit in the damage range department. It's no problem here. For our barrel, I'm using the hybrid barrel, so we're getting a bit of a range and velocity boost. For my magazine, I'm using that 30 round mag because, as I said earlier, this gives you an insanely fast reload time at 0.98 seconds. It improves our aim down sight and sprint out times. And we still got a decent enough magazine capacity at 30 rounds, so I really like that option, at least on this build. For my rear grip, I'm using the Nanite grip. This one's going to be helping with initial recoil as well as general recoil climb, and we're topping it off with buffer springs, so we have even more recoil control out of this. And as you can see here, this is a very accurate version of this gun. One thing I haven't mentioned yet as well, I love the iron sights on this gun, so I won't be using an optic too often with this. The iron sights are incredible. And this is just a nice balanced way to use this, especially if you want to be a little bit more on the aggressive side. Like, I wouldn't be sliding or diving into fights, but you can be reasonably aggressive while still handling yourself at range just fine. As for the next one, this is my gunfighter build, and with this, we're using a lot of similar attachments, so we still have that Recoil suppressor. This time I'm using the velocity barrel, since bullet velocity would be the bottleneck on this otherwise. We have the Sentry Pro hand stop. This one's going to be helping a bit with horizontal recoil control, but it also helps with our idle sway values and our aim walking steadiness, and that's just a nice bonus to have on this. For our magazine, this time I'm using the 45 round mag, so we still have quite a slow reload time, but we can spray and pray a little bit more since we've got more ammo to work with. For our rear grip, we have the quick draw grip. This is the one that helps with aim down sight time quite nicely. It brings that value down very nicely, especially when combined with the control stock, which harms our handling stats, but it also really helps nicely with recoil. Then after that, we have the 3mm motion strike laser, and this one helps with damage range as well as recoil stabilization, so that's quite nice to have. And then finally, we're once again using buffer springs on this, and with all of this combined, we have a very accurate version of this gun with an excellent range profile, excellent velocity profile. It's just a little bit more accurate and versatile than the previous build that I shared, and a very solid way to use this gun. And this just leaves us with the last build I wanted to share, and this is my bounce shot build. So with this, we're of course using that prestige attachment, so we get 3 bounces for every shot that we fire. I'm once again using the Recoil suppressor. This time I'm using the long barrel, since we're just going to be banking shots like crazy, and sometimes those shots are going to be traveling very long distances, so I want to have a really nice improvement to my damage range, and this barrel will allow me to do that. For our magazine, I've got the biggest magazine possible, the 55 round mag, since it's going to be a bit more about spraying and praying into rooms or down some corridors, for instance, and that can be helpful to have the biggest capacity possible. For my grip, I have the mobile quick draw grip, which is just going to be helping with all of our handling stats, and that just helps keep things nice and balanced there. And then finally, we have the prestige attachment itself. And with this version of this gun, it's not insanely accurate by any means. It's far less accurate than the previous builds, but this is much more about just spraying and praying in the direction of enemy players or into a room that enemy players are in. And in those situations, you don't need extreme precision. You're just kind of hoping for the best. And so this is just an interesting way that you can use the gun. Probably not the most effective or meta way, but a fun change of pace where you can try to get those bank shot kills. And there we have it. That's going to wrap it up for today's gun guide on the EGRT-17. And when it comes to my thoughts on this gun, I think it's pretty decent, especially when we're looking at mid-range situations. This gun does great. As I said, I love the iron sight on it. I would say recoil-wise, while it is quite accurate, I definitely prefer the M15 if I'm going for more accuracy at longer ranges, even though this gun has a better time to kill and better damage ranges. And also, as I said, generally speaking with that Ricochet mechanic, I do consider this to be a downside unless you're using the prestige attachment, because it can be really frustrating knowing that somebody's behind just a very thin piece of cover and there's nothing you can really do about that outside of trying to get that perfect bounce shot angle, which is far more difficult than just shooting at that light surface where you think the enemy player is. Now, in saying that, even though I do think that is sort of a gimmick mechanic, I still like that they brought it to the game. I'm all about bringing in more variety and more interesting builds and interesting ways to approach the game and play the game. And it is far more interesting than if they just brought this gun in with no unique characteristic like that. So I am glad they did it, and this is where I want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How do you feel about this new assault rifle, as well as its Ricochet mechanic? Also, if you guys have missed any of the previous gun guides, including the new SMG, the Rev 46, I have covered that, and I will leave a link to the playlist in the description of the video. And if you enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.